Welcome to the 3-Minute Gestalt series, unit number 19 on shame. So shame is a subject in Gestalt that never appeared at the beginning of Fritz Perls' time and certainly didn't appear at the end. It came up 15 to 20 years after he passed away. Gestalt is always, previously was known as quite a confrontive therapy, very authentic, very effective, quite lightning fast to go to the heart of issues, confrontive. But what we realized over time is that as well as the emotions which come up, which we're dealing with, there's another layer of experience which is very important, and that is shame. So often associated with certain emotions, when we've felt those particular experiences in circumstances in which we were isolated or humiliated in some way or left feeling alone, often these feelings of shame are embedded along with the traumatic experiences. And shame itself is a very difficult, it's natural, everybody feels it at some point. It indicates separation from the group, but it's always very difficult even in a passing sense, let alone if it's a repeated experience. And if it is a repeated experience, then someone can develop not only momentary shame, but they can develop what's called ground shame. And this is something that, as therapists generally, we need to be sensitive to and to be able to work with. So now Gestalt has sort of shifted into a much more relational form of therapy, more emphasis on support, less explicitly on confrontation. Because confrontation, as much as it can, be dramatic and move people along and expose things that were out of awareness, it can also lead to shame, and that becomes counterproductive therapeutically. So we've come to realize that people need a lot more support, and if they do get some level of challenge or confrontation, it generally needs to be a lot slower and passed out and much more balanced with the support of the therapist. One of the ways in which we work with shame in Gestalt is that in the horizontal type of relationship I was describing, the I-thou relationship, where the therapist reveals themselves, that helps reduce the exposure of the client. Because often therapy is a very kind of interrogative type of process where we're asking the client what they feel and what their experience is. And whilst that clearly is part of the therapeutic endeavor, it can also leave the client quite exposed, particularly if what gets revealed is very raw, and the therapist sits in a relatively safe place asking the questions. So one of the ways to deal with the dynamic of shame is for the therapist to stop asking so many questions and start talking about themselves a little bit more in relation to the client, especially in some ways revealing the therapist's vulnerability appropriately, not taking over the session, but enough that the focus comes off of the client. And that's one example of how we work with shame in Gestalt. We're also being shame sensitive, as we describe it, which means we look out for signs of shame, and if someone goes to shame, then we tend to slow the therapy down, less phenomenological focused awareness work, more going out to the field, more dialogical work. That's very important. Otherwise, the therapy can kind of run aground. And one of the signs of that is the therapist starts feeling shame, because shame is kind of contagious. And often if a therapist feels shame, then they can shame back the client. You can get a very negative cycle ensuing. So it's important for both therapist and client that the therapist is able to see signs of shame and know what to do. We can talk more about that in the unit.